Welcome to the panel on Trump 2025, U.S. Constitution, Military, NATO, Ukraine, and Taiwan. One of our guests, David Crane, Founding Chief Prosecutor, UN Special Court of Sierra Leone, missed his flight, but he was kind enough to join us virtually. Thank you, Mr. Crane. Rory Stewart is with us. He served as UK government as Minister of State for Environment, Minister of International Development, Minister for Africa, and host of a popular podcast, The Rest is Politics. Thank you. And here we have Tienchi Martin Liao, which would you say Chinese pen, independent Chinese pen?
We say it independent Chinese pen.
Independent Chinese pen. Thank you all three for joining. If you don't mind kicking us off, Ms. Liao, because we're in a very different political situation compared to when we were here last year. U.S. Constitution, many would make an argument, is in a dire position because of the executive overreach by those critics of Donald Trump would say. And that obviously has implications internationally as well because he's taking a very different path towards America's traditional ally. So talk about what that means for Taiwan, how you feel about it, what are the anxieties that is rising from it?
Thank you very much.
You don't mind bringing it closer to your, yes.
Well, we see that President Trump has tried to settle the Ukraine war in such a mad rush, and we ask why he has to do it in such an urgent way, and even in a very unfair way. We know how he treated President Zelensky in White House, and he praised the aggressor Putin and even blamed Ukraine started the war. Why is he doing that, and what his attitude or what he's going to do will affect, of course, Taiwan too? Why? I will say that since after the Second World War, American has actually a so-called island chain strategy. I will explain it, but in the 50 and 60 years, even till to the end of the 80s, it's not really that important. But after after Soviet Union has collapsed, the situation has changed. Actually, President Obama has aware that China is a rising power, and the area in Indo-Pacific area is it's a quite complicated situation. Why? I say that there is one line. It's called the first island chain. This is from northwest from Asian. This is a string of Pacific archipelagos from Japan alongside the east coast of Asia. It composed of Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and Borneo, and it goes down through to the Malay Peninsula. This line, the most part of this line is of course in ocean, in water, and China claims it belongs to China. So that's really is a kind of alarm to most of the neighboring country, and United States noticed that this is a very dangerous attitude of China, because the South China Sea and East China Sea, if China said this is our area, this is our maritime area, it threatens Americans' position. And we know that area, this Indo-Pacific area, it has half of the world population is there, and 2/3 of the world economy happened there. And so American cannot afford that China said, well, this is our territory. So, but Taiwan is in middle of this line, of this island chain, and as we all know that China said Taiwan belongs to China, is a part of China, and we also know that China has tried to, since decades, do the military threats to Taiwan, especially since August 2022, since Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. And the military threat escalated. Daily, China, the so-called People's Liberation Army, sent aircraft, sent warships, and circling Taiwan. If I just give you a statistic from the Defense Ministry of Taiwan, last year, 2024, there were 5,701 aircrafts circling Taiwan and 2,701 warships circling Taiwan. Most of them have crossed the central line. You know, the Taiwan Strait is 180 kilometers, and this is the distance between these two, the China continent and Taiwan. And the narrowest place is 130 kilometers. What that means, the people living in Taiwan, every day they are living in fear. They feel really endangered. And the United States, what is the attitude of the United States? We know that 1979, America has broken the diplomatic relationship to Taiwan and has established the official relationship with China. Since then, there is the so-called Taiwan Relation Act. And according to this act, the United States its duty, or it's required United States to protect Taiwan. And first of all, United States has to provide the protective weapons to Taiwan, not protective weapons to Taiwan. Second, the United States has to also somehow guarantee the security of Taiwan. That is in the Relation Act. And well, now we see that President Trump said, well, Ukraine is the aggressor, it's not a victim. And Taiwan is in a similar situation in Ukraine. If China attacks Taiwan, I'm afraid that I wonder what President Trump will say. But I do know that one thing, I think America cannot risk to lose Taiwan. Geographically, not. And also economically, United States cannot lose Taiwan. You also know that TSMC, Taiwan has a very dominant chips industry. It provides about 60% of the semiconductors to the world market, and to the highest, to the advanced chips, 2 nanometers. Even Taiwan provide even 90% to the world market. So if Taiwan falls into the hand of China, all these kind of things can have an enormous influence of the world.
If you don't mind just giving me a sense of the audience here, what if you ask an average citizen of Taiwan today, how likely do they see a Chinese attack? What would they say to you?
I'm very thankful that you asked this question, because mostly the politics, international politics, don't ask what the people think. It's just the politicians. They make the decision. And this is a wonderful question. The people in Taiwan, Taiwan has never been governed by the People's Republic of China. Taiwan belonged to China, but that was 300 years ago, till to the 20th century. It's one country. But Taiwan as a republic, Taiwan, we call it Republic of China, Taiwan's official name. Taiwan is the first republic in Asia. It has the revolution 1911. Dr. Sun Yat-sen has thrown out the Qing dynasty, the Qing Empire. And the Communist Party has taken over the power 1949. And these two parts, China and Taiwan, they are separated. Taiwan never belongs to Communist China. But Taiwan represents even China till 1971 in the United Nations. If you say Republic of China, it's China and Taiwan. And then 1971, this UN resolution 2758 said China belongs to the People's Republic of China. Taiwan just left the United Nations. So the people in Taiwan, just imagine, Taiwan is now prosperous, is free, is a democratic republic, and the people, it has totally free press, freedom in every sense. How do you think the people would like to be governed by Peking government? I always ask my German friends in Germany, do you want to be governed by Honecker, by the communists, the East Germany? Nobody would want to have that. And the people in Taiwan, they just enjoy the freedom to travel, enjoy the freedom to express themselves and everything. And according to the statistics or the what we read in media, over 85% of the people in Taiwan, they don't want to have any change. They want to keep the status quo. Taiwan is independent, but Taiwan is not allowed to say that. Taiwan cannot say we are an independent country. If they say that, it gives China an excuse to attack Taiwan. Taiwan just say we are existing here. We are Taiwanese. That's it. Nobody wants to be governed by an unfree country like China.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Stewart, can we come to you now at this point and talk Ukraine a little bit?
Absolutely, here I am.
Go ahead.
Well, I think, and I'm going to defer to David, who I think has also been very patiently waiting. So I'll try to keep my remarks quite brief. But I think we need to take a quick step back and understand just how dramatic the change since Trump came in has been. Essentially, we've created a order since the Second World War, which very flawed, very hypocritical in many ways, but was fundamentally based on three principles. One of them was an attachment to the idea of liberal democracy. The second was an attachment to the idea of free trade. And the third was an attachment to what we used to pompously call the rules-based international order. And the United States was right at the very center of this. It created this, it funded this, it helped establish NATO, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the IMF, the World Bank, put its weight behind the United Nations. And we've now entered a very, very different world. And one of the reasons we're struggling as analysts to make sense of President Trump's position on Ukraine is that he's rejecting most of the fundamental assumptions of the old order. So, put the story back any time in the last 80 years, the assumption would have been that had Russia decided to invade a neighboring state, challenging its sovereignty, this would have been a fundamental threat to the global order, and it would have been the responsibility of the international community to respond to that invasion and attempt to restore the pre-existing borders. Insofar as the United States would get involved in this, with Western Europe as its ally on the one hand and Russia on the other, for very, very strong historical reasons, but also a shared commitment to liberal democracy and a particular vision of an economic system, it would have allied with Western Europe. Now we're in a situation in which President Trump has indicated not just that he's not interested in defending the sovereignty of Ukraine, but he appears to have significant sympathy for the views of Vladimir Putin. He's been talking about Crimea being Russian territory. He's been talking about the Zaporizhzhia energy plant being part of Russia, although it's deep within Ukrainian territory. And I think as Europe struggles to get its head around it, there are certain conclusions it can draw. Number one, despite President Macron's fantasies, we can, I think, be pretty confident there will be no United States security guarantees. President Trump has been pretty clear about that from the beginning. He scrupulously avoided saying in those White House meetings that he would provide any security guarantees, and there's no reason to suggest that he will ever provide them. Second thing we can be pretty confident about is that Russia is in a very strong negotiating position, because President Trump does not want to get into a military confrontation with Russia. He wants to get out. And because of that, he has almost no leverage to use against Russia, which gives Russia fantastic opportunities to slow roll, delay, come up with technical objections, and keep Putin discussing directly with Trump, which is absolutely central to their strategy. They don't want meetings which involve Marco Rubio or Waltz at a more junior level. They want the meeting directly with President Trump because they think he will listen to them more closely. The third thing is that the United States claim that its fundamental interest is in Europe taking responsibility for its own security is a mischaracterization of President Trump's position. It may reflect the views of Eldridge Colby, for example, in the DoD, and there certainly has been a strong tradition going back through Obama and Biden, which has been about Europe shouldering more of its burden in security, and it's a perfectly justifiable vision. But had Trump really been serious about that, what you would have seen is a transition plan. You would not have seen the immediate turning off of American intelligence and support. You would have not seen the scene in the White House and humiliation of Zelensky. You would have not seen the clear signals that the US is not interested in fulfilling its Article 5 NATO commitments in relation to the Baltic. What actually is going on, I think, in President Trump's head is an interest in Europe spending more on US defense equipment. And this 5% GDP commitment is largely designed to create jobs in the United States selling US defense equipment. And of course, as usual, this is going to create a very difficult situation where Europe is almost certainly going to have to confront and challenge Russia somewhere. It will need to decide whether it wants to challenge Russia in Ukraine or later on in Lithuania. It will have to develop its own sovereign capacity independent of the United States, and that will be very painful because there will be a whole series of tariffs and pains as the United States attempts to prevent Europe from developing sovereign capacity. And this is what I'm going to finish on as I hand to David. Trump's ideal is not Europe having independent sovereign capacity. His ideal is for them to spend more on US defense equipment and remain dependent on the United States without it costing the United States a single dollar. That he will not succeed in achieving. Over to David.
Before we go to Mr. Crane, can I ask a follow-up? Are you saying the entire motivation for this massive shift is a bump in sales of defense equipment, of U.S. defense equipment, or is there something else? We had a senator from Oregon last week going viral asking a U.S. official whether Mr. Trump is a Russian asset. So is that something that Europeans openly or privately talk about?
Definitely something that people talk about privately. It's very difficult to really see anything that President Trump has done since he's come into office which would not have been exactly what a traditional KGB handler would have wanted him to do. The video that he released cheerfully on Truth Social of Gaza being turned into the Riviera with gold statues of Donald Trump and dancing girls could have been designed by a Russian psychological warfare operation and released around the world to discredit the US president rather than it being released by the US president himself. However, I think although he may have been compromised in the past by the Russian intelligence services, that is not the key thing happening now. It's very difficult for an intelligence service to actually fully control an elected president, whatever your history has been. So I think it's more likely that he is somebody who has strong sympathy for authoritarians, a deep affection for Putin, a great admiration for Putin as a fellow wealthy man, a real belief that there's economic opportunity. And in relation to Ukraine, yes, of course, he wants to create jobs in the United States by manufacturing defense equipment, and he doesn't want America to spend any money. But the fundamental driver is twofold. Isolationism. The US doesn't want responsibility for the rest of the world, which is why Taiwan should probably be worried. And secondly, a desire to generate spectacle. He's a reality TV star, and an enormous amount of that, an enormous amount of what's going to destabilize the world in the next 3.5 years, is whatever he wakes up with in the morning that he thinks is going to create a great headline.
Great. Mr. Crane, where do we go from here?
Well, I appreciate and I'm excited to be here to address you. I'm going to read my remarks only because I consider my remarks a warning. It dovetails very nicely in the comments of my esteemed colleagues on this panel. But, we gather to reflect on a pivotal period in American political history, marked by the second administration of Donald Trump, a time that fundamentally altered that nation's approach to governance in international relations. As we delve into the substantial ramifications of his policies, let us critically assess the broader consequences for that country, its allies, and the principles that undermine global stability. Cornerstone of Trump's second term is his go-it-alone foreign policy. This marks a departure from decades of diplomatic practice, which had prioritized multilateral cooperation, engagement, and dialogue. Under his administration, the United States increasingly has positioned itself as a destabilizing force on the world stage. Listen to this, a destabilizing force on the world stage, often stepping away from resolving disputes through peaceful means. Instead of diplomacy, we are witnessing a stark pivot to the threat of force as a first resort rather than a last. The necessity of peace, a principle echoed by the great physicist Albert Einstein, who stated, "Peace cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding," is seemingly lost in many of Trump's approaches. His heavy-handed rhetoric and threats of military action include, and I can't believe I'm actually telling you this, include consideration of invading Panama again, the controversial claim over Greenland, and the dismissive suggestion that Canada could become the 51st state. Each of these points serve as a clear signal to the international community that America is ready to challenge the sovereignty of its neighbors in pursuit of its own interests, even by aggression. Such a stance undermined the very principles that have guided American foreign policy for generations. It has bred uncertainty among long-standing allies and raised concerns about a U.S. commitment to diplomacy. The consequences of this approach are profound. When the world's leading democracy appears willing to resort to military action over negotiation, the implications for global peace and security are alarming. In a world where the specter of conflict looms large, a world where Benjamin Franklin wisely noted that peace is not merely the absence of war, it is also a state of mind. We must recognize the importance of fostering a culture of negotiation, patience, and understanding. As we examine the international crisis, consider the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. During his second administration, Trump has fixated on bringing an immediate end to this conflict started by Russian aggression, without regard to the immense stakes involved. This fixation on a rapid resolution, regardless of the implications for Ukraine's sovereignty or Europe's stability poses a direct threat to the principles of self-determination and territorial integrity that have long been upheld by international law. Trump's approach has created a chilling effect on NATO, where unity among members is crucial for collective security. His repeated public criticisms of NATO allies and calls for them to increase their military expenditures without addressing broader strategic concerns raises serious questions about America's reliability as a partner. This hesitancy to engage with allies and a growing deference to Russia and Vladimir Putin not only undermine the alliance, but paint a dangerous picture of American credibility in global politics. The repercussions of these policies were not confined to American democracies. Authoritarian leaders and strongmen across the world watch intently as the U.S. altered its stance related to international peace and security, taking note of how Western powers deal with Russian aggression and the Russian crisis. The message is clear. A lack of resolve from democratic leaders may embolden those who wield authoritarian power to act elsewhere, such as China's claim on Taiwan. As a result, the fabric of international cooperation has begun to fray around the edges. Dictators may misinterpret ever-changing U.S. responses as permission to pursue their own aggressive ambitions, believing that Western democracies will falter in their commitments to uphold democratic values and protect the principles of international law, with the support of these values by the United States gone. The world has become a stage for geopolitical posturing and shifting power centers away from the UN paradigm. The stakes could not be higher. In contemplating these issues, we are reminded that the course of history is shaped by our actions and, frankly, indeed, our inactions. As we recover from the tumult of this new administration under Trump, it becomes imperative that we learn from this chapter in our history. The shadows of the 1930s loom large on the horizon. Western democracies must reconvene, reaffirming their commitment to international law, diplomacy, and mutual support. Now listen to me here. This is Europe's moment to stand strong and counter the rising threat of authoritarianism. Let me read that to you again. This is Europe's moment in history to stand strong and counter the rising threat of authoritarianism. What are our grandchildren going to ask? What were they thinking during those times? Let's hope that it's a positive thought. The voices of leadership must rise together to restore trust and confidence among our allies. Peace is the pursuit of all, and we must champion a diplomatic approach that insists on collaborative conflict resolution rather than returning to saber-rattling tactics. We must ensure our response to aggression is resolute, yet rooted in dialogue, fostering a world where coexistence, respect, and diplomacy prevail over division, conflict, and strife. Thank you.
Wow. Mr. Crane, can I follow with one that is more of a domestic political issue in the U.S.? Do you feel there are any Republicans in the Senate in particular that might finally find it to be too much and push back against the current path of the administration?
Well, it's a good question, an important question. I've been sitting here watching domestically. Is there a gag factor in American politics? Let me reiterate. Is there a gag factor? In other words, will there come a time when the slavish Republican Party, who has bent the knee to this wannabe tyrant, is going to say, no, this is just too much? Sadly, I'm surprised. For someone who has served his country 30 years as a serving officer, as well as a very senior member of the U.S. federal government, I am surprised how easily the republic that we call the United States of America is transitioning more towards an authoritarian kleptocracy than the republic that has been together for close to 250 years. And This is very, very, very saddening. At this point in time, and to answer your question honestly, I don't know.
Mr. Stewart, do you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Especially on the point of whether Europe can have its moment now.
yes, I mean, I think the challenge with Europe having its moment is one of resources and political will, which is a pompous way of saying that we do not have sovereign capacity. The United States has very deliberately created a system where our defense equipment is almost entirely integrated into US platforms and systems. You know, we could not, in the United Kingdom, for example, manufacture our own missiles and try to fire them because our launch system is made by Lockheed Martin. The planes that we have, that we buy from the US, the entire software package could simply be disabled if the US wanted to slow roll it. So we would go through a period of immense vulnerability and transition if we tried to move away from US equipment towards our own domestic capacity. We almost certainly have to do that because the risks are very, very considerable, but the costs will be immense. So there'll be the problem of transition, right? That period of 2-3 years where we will have inadequate, highly inadequate equipment. Our equipment is inadequate enough as it is, but minus US equipment, very, very inadequate. At a time when Putin will be emboldened by his success in Ukraine and trying to advance elsewhere. And we will have to spend an enormous amount of money. I mean, far more than the 2.5% by 2030, which Keir Starmer's talking about, because we would have to completely rebuild our military capacity, rethink interoperability. We'd have to think about whether we're serious about using a French nuclear shield. We'd have to ask ourselves whether the UK nuclear weapons can actually fire without consent from the United States, having spent billions of pounds buying them from the US for 50 years. And we don't really know how to do this. We don't know how to do other things too. We have no idea at all in our doctrine what we would do if the US actually threatened a NATO state. So what happens if it actually did attack Greenland, for example? We have no doctrine. Right? We don't know how to do it. We haven't planned for it. We haven't prepared for it. Our staff colleges don't teach it. Everything that we train on and assume is based on the idea that we operate alongside the United States. We don't know how to plan for conflict with the United States. And at the moment, Trump is able to exploit the fact that many individual countries can see advantages in trying to cut side deals, hoping they're not going to be noticed. Mexico being less confrontational than Canada, UK and Australia being less confrontational. UK and Australia being less confrontational than France and Germany. So a lot to get through, requiring extraordinary courage and statesmanship. And at the same time, you've got a US administration trying to undermine us from within by supporting far-right populist parties in Germany, in Austria, in Spain, in France, and in the United Kingdom, designed to try to undermine our democracies from within.
You know, Trump is a bully, and you have to confront a bully. You have to stand up to him. And he is assuming that Europe will cave based on the very correct statements by Rory about how we are so integrated from weapon systems, et cetera. But it has to start somewhere, even if it's just a strong mutual support signal that we're going to break away. That will cause him to hesitate because, again, that's a huge chip out of any kind of power that the United States has. And, you know, we're shifting into power centers, Russia, China, United States, Europe, as opposed to staying strong with the United Nations paradigm. We're going to break up in these power centers, which is going to have huge ramifications for the next generation if we don't stand up now. Because, again, the 30s loomed so large. We weren't prepared then either. And we use that as an excuse in some ways. But we have to stay that the emperor has no clothes, and we have to stand firm and let him know that we actually are willing to do this, even though it's difficult, as has been stated very correctly. It has to start. We have to send signals that he can't have his way every time he gets up every morning.
let's finish it off with a return to Taiwan. Can Taiwan survive without the United States helping it?
Maybe before I answer that question, I want just to respond to what Mr. Crane and Mr. Stewart said. I think what Trump has done in the past 2 months, his policy and his way, as Mr. Crane has already said, to Canada, to Greenland, and so on, I think this is a wake call for Europe. I don't think the dominant role of the United States in NATO can be replaced by the European country in a short time. But in the long run, it is the consciousness of the European country has been waken up. For instance, from the NATO country, 23 members of the 32 members of the NATO have already have their defense expense exceed already 2%. And 5 countries like Greece, Estonia, and Latvia, Poland, is even more than that. Poland has their expense is 4.2 percent from their GDP. So I think this is a gesture. And recently, the new German government, going to become the new government, has just not passed, but they made an agreement among the different parties that Germany wants to lift the debt brake. That means the government is allowed to raise very high debt, and it's even such an amount is 1 trillion euros, but not for 1 year, for the coming maybe years. And a large part of this trillion will go to military, to defense. And I think this is a really signal that, President Macron has said NATO has a brain death. It's not functioning. And he said that several years ago. And I think Trump has kicked the European countries awake. And every country knows that we cannot no more depend on the United States. And even France and England, they said we have a nuclear arsenal, and we will try to provide protection for the European countries. So I think all together, and the European Commission, von der Leyen has said she will try to release 8 billions to support Ukraine. So I think all this together shows that European countries knows that they can no more just lay in there and wait that the American will help us. I think this is really, really very important, that Europe not great again, but it's not just laying there and let Trump do what he wants.
Thank you, everybody. This was alarming and very fruitful conversation. Thank you for joining us virtually, Mr. Crane, Mr. Stewart. This concludes this hour's panel. Thank you.
Thank you all.